Good morning. Welcome. We're just waiting for everybody to come in. So I'm going to give it just 1 or 2 more minutes and then we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for being here. Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, everybody. Really excited to have you all here today for this really exciting webinar. My name is Sarah Karlinski, and I'm the research director here at the Turner Center for Housing Innovation at UC Berkeley. I'm very pleased because today we're going to be sharing findings from our upcoming report on housing governance, focused on the cost of fragmentation and what California can learn from the governance of affordable housing finance systems in other states. This forthcoming work will examine how different states across the country structure governance of their affordable housing finance systems. In this work, we provide an overview of how different states organize their affordable housing functions, and we profile different initiatives and reforms that states have implemented to make their affordable housing finance systems more efficient and streamlined. We have an amazing panel here today. Really, really excited. This is a panel of leaders from across the country, including representatives from New York, Minnesota, and Oregon, all of which have deep expertise in governing complex affordable housing finance systems. We hope that this conversation will highlight promising strategies that different states have used to streamline the awarding of affordable housing finance resources, as well as effective initiatives to improve state-level organizational structures. We also hope this discussion provides insight for states that are considering reorganizing or streamlining their state housing functions, including, of course, our own state, the great state of California, that is currently in the process of contemplating reorg. Before we get started, I have a couple of housekeeping items. First, we're going to be taking questions today via the Q&A which you can see at the bottom of your screen. So please go ahead and drop your questions to our panelists and presenters there in the Q&A section, and we'll spend some time at the end of the panel answering audience questions. Secondly, I just wanted to let you all know that this conversation will be recorded and available on our website. And lastly, I would very much like to thank our funders for this research, the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. Thank you so much for supporting this important research. With that, I'm very pleased to turn things over to my colleague, Jenna Davis. Jenna is a postdoctoral researcher with the Turner Center, and she's the primary author on this recent governance work. And with that, Jenna, please go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Sarah. All right, good morning, everyone. I'm going to be sharing from our upcoming report from the Turner Center called The Costs of Fragmentation.
Hey, Jenna, I'm sorry to interrupt. First of all, Colleen, we can't see Jenna's slides. Secondly, Jenna, you're kind of cutting in and out, so you actually might want to just cut off your screen, and then now we can go ahead and see the slides. So that's great. We can see them now.
Okay, great. Let me know if I'm still cutting out here.
You are a little bit, so you just might want to, yeah.
Okay, great. So today I'm going to be sharing findings from our upcoming report from the Turner Center called The Cost of Fragmentation: What California Can Learn from How Other States Administer Their Subsidy Programs. This is a report that focuses on how different states across the US approach the governance of their affordable housing systems, connected alongside Sarah Karlinski, our Director of Research and Policy, and Samuel Arnett, our graduate student researcher. Next slide, please. But first, let's define what housing governance is. Housing governance refers to the system that regulates, incentivizes, and funds housing production. States across the country have taken different approaches to how they govern their affordable housing finance systems. In some states, key housing functions like allocating tax credits, issuing bonds, or managing rental assistance programs are consolidated within one or two central agencies. In other states, however, these responsibilities are fragmented across multiple entities. And understanding differences in state level governance structures, particularly fragmentation in governance, is important because it shapes how housing is funded and delivered, which I'll talk about next. Next slide, please. So fragmentation in housing governance, when you have multiple entities involved in administering various aspects of affordable housing finance, can introduce some significant coordination challenges for affordable housing developers. One major impact is on the timing and the costs of getting projects built. Affordable housing developers often need to patch together funding from multiple sources to make a project financially viable. This is known as gap financing, and it typically requires applying to several different state programs, each administered by a different agency, depending on the state. And if those agencies don't coordinate their application timelines or funding cycles, developers can run into problems. For example, a developer might secure one funding source but miss the application window for another. And since many of these programs operate on an annual or a semi-annual cycle, missing a deadline could mean waiting several months to reapply. And this delay isn't just frustrating, it's expensive. During the waiting period, developers still have to cover carrying costs like insurance. During this time, market conditions could become more unfavorable as well. So for instance, interest rates might rise or maybe the cost of construction increases. And as a result, the total cost of a project can climb significantly. So fragmentation in affordable housing governance in California is a particular challenge. The core entities that are involved in administering key affordable housing finance resources include the California Department of Housing and Community Development, or HCD, which administers state gap financing programs and federal financing programs like the Home Investment Partnerships Program, or CDBG. Another entity is Cal HFA, which lends low interest debt to affordable housing developers and offers low interest mortgages to low income Californians. Another entity in the mix is the California Tax Credit Allocation Committee, which issues 4% and 9% low-income housing tax credits, while we have a separate entity, the California Debt Limit Allocation Committee, that issues tax-exempt private activity bonds. And so for this project, we were interested in exploring how other states approach the governance of their affordable housing finance systems. And we had two research questions that guided our project. So first, how does the governance of key affordable housing finance resources vary across states? And second, what can we learn from how other states govern their affordable housing finance resources? To answer these research questions, we conducted in-depth, semi-structured interviews with 33 affordable housing developers, state officials, and housing finance experts. And the purpose of these interviews was to explore how fragmentation impacts the delivery of affordable housing and to understand factors that could drive governance success, including any measures that have helped to streamline the delivery of affordable housing. To better understand how fragmentation impacts the delivery of affordable housing and how different states structure their housing governance systems, we conducted interviews with stakeholders in 6 key case study states. These states included Massachusetts, Maryland, North Carolina, Minnesota, Oregon, and New York. And we selected these states based on input from affordable housing developers. Some of these states were identified as being comparatively easier to work in, often thanks to streamlined or coordinating financing processes implemented at the state level. Others stood out because of recent efforts to reform or reorganize how their housing functions are structured. So let's start with Massachusetts. Here, a high degree of interagency collaboration led to the creation of MassDocs, which is a standardized set of loan documents that can be used across multiple public funding programs. For developers, this helps to reduce legal costs and paperwork when assembling financing from several resources. We also looked at Maryland, where housing functions are highly centralized within a single cabinet level agency called the Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development. The state's HFA, or Housing Finance Agency, is also housed within the state housing department. North Carolina also offers a centralized approach. Most funding is managed by the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency, which has earned a strong reputation among developers for its consistency and efficiency. Next, we looked at Minnesota, which has implemented a one-stop shop solution, which tries to simplify the funding process by aligning applications or coordinating funding sources, making it easier for affordable housing developers to apply for funding. We also looked at Oregon for similar reasons, which has recently streamlined the application process for funding through its ORCA system. And finally, we looked at New York, where the state merged several housing entities in 2010 to reduce administrative inefficiencies and improve coordination across housing programs. And you'll hear much more about these systems and how they work and their implications from our panelists, who bring firsthand experience working within these governance models. Right, so what did we find from our interviews? Our interviewees widely agreed that when separate agencies administer different pots of money, this adds uncertainty to the development process and can impact project underwriting. So for instance, one stakeholder who has experience working in New York and California as a developer explained, quote, "In the time it takes to cobble together all the money, your costs are escalating, might be like 1% per month, so 12% per year. So all of a sudden, that's 8 million more that you've got to raise. So all of this time equates to escalation for the subs, and it makes closing these gaps really, really challenging." Stakeholders also highlighted that fragmentation can result in duplicative or conflicting funding requirements when different entities administer different funding streams, some of which carry different or sometimes conflicting requirements in order for a project to be competitive. For instance, one stakeholder who works in California described, quote, "One state entity says a toothbrush holder has to be on the left side of the counter, and the city says it has to be on the right side of the counter." And you're like, what do I do now? I mean, that's a silly example, but that's the kind of things that happen. And if the programmatic requirements are different across the funding entities, it just becomes a thorny and time-consuming exercise. In terms of ingredients for success, stakeholders argued that a one-stop shop solution can reduce development uncertainty and costs. It also makes things administratively easier for developers. Developers explained that it means they didn't have to fill out a separate form for every funding source. Oregon and Minnesota are both examples of states that have implemented one of these one-stop shop solutions. Stakeholders have also argued that states that are easier to work in are those that have a clear and consistent policy vision. They explain that when states align their housing priorities and maintain stability in their funding strategies, developers can plan and execute their projects more efficiently. For instance, one stakeholder explained, quote, "States that have clarity as to what they're doing and it's stable for a period of years, then the developers know what they're doing and they start producing deals that are responsive to those priorities." Stakeholders also argued that strong leadership is instrumental to encouraging interagency collaboration and reducing bureaucratic silos, arguing that looking at organizational structures alone are not the only feature that makes a state comparatively easier to work in. For instance, one stakeholder shared, quote, a lot of it comes down to the human level leadership and how effective things are. So there's been high points of really effective coordination, even as separate agencies. There have been lower points of coordination, and I think that comes down to who's coordinating, end quote. Here, stakeholders consistently pointed to Massachusetts as a clear example of this, where there are multiple housing agencies involved at the state level, but where staff across agencies have worked collaboratively together to develop innovative solutions like the MassDocs program. Some stakeholders argued that consolidating housing functions can produce significant benefits, mentioning that it could help to improve coordination across agencies and streamline administrative inefficiencies. For instance, one stakeholder who worked in New York following its efforts to reorganize their housing functions gave a pretty illustrative example of this. Prior to the consolidation, she explained that coordination challenges would sometimes arise when agencies had separate asset management staff. But the consolidation enabled different asset management staff to ultimately get on the same page about who was doing what and to better clarify responsibilities. At the same time, other stakeholders raised concerns about consolidating housing functions into one agency, fearing that it could become partisan or risky if leadership were weak or did not prioritize affordable housing. So for instance, one stakeholder described, quote, if you have one agency doing everything, if that agency is not working well, the system is really broken. There's no one to put political pressure on them. But if you've got 2 or 3 agencies working on housing and different access to state and local money, mostly state money, then there's a little bit more ways to advocate for improvements at an agency. So collectively, these findings suggest that the most successful states have high capacity, well-trained staff who embrace collaboration and customer service. This is evidence in Massachusetts, where several agencies came together to collaboratively develop MassDocs. These states generally have a single point of contact for developers throughout the process, from application to through underwriting and ongoing monitoring, as evidenced through places like Minnesota and Oregon that have adopted one-stop shop solutions. While achieving these goals of greater customer service and collaboration in a fragmented system might not be impossible, it may be easier to achieve and sustain over the long term when it's done through a single governmental entity. Done right, effective governance translates over time into lower costs, faster execution, and greater stakeholder confidence. So I will leave it at that. Thank you, and looking forward to hearing reflections from our panelists about how things work in their specific states. Great, so now I'm excited to turn things over to our moderator, Jill Cromarty, who will introduce our panelists. But first, I'll introduce our moderator. Jill Cromarty brings decades of multifaceted experience to the real estate and affordable housing sectors, including the LIHTC program administration to advisory services and asset management and LIHTC development. Beyond her client work, Jill contributes to the industry as an HCCP Board of Governor and as a member of the National Advisory Panel for the Women's Affordable Housing Network, where she helps shape the future of the field through mentorship, advocacy, and thought leadership. Thank you for moderating, Jill.
Thank you, Jenna. It's good to see everybody out there. I'm excited to introduce our wonderful lineup of panelists and participate in this conversation. First, I'll introduce Commissioner Ruth Ann Wisnauskas. She was appointed Commissioner and CEO of New York State Homes and Community Renewal in 2017. Since taking the helm at HCR, Ruth Ann has led the successful completion of the state's first 5-year, 100,000 home housing plan, as well as the launch of a new $25 billion housing plan that is creating and preserving an additional 100,000 homes. Ruth Ann directs HCR's programs and policies to achieve mission of providing New Yorkers with quality, sustainable, affordable housing while incorporating high standards and practices for energy efficiency and green development, prioritizing improved access to broadband, healthcare, and green space, promoting equal and fair access to housing opportunities, and collaborating with partners on developments that take a holistic approach to revitalizing entire neighborhoods. Welcome, Commissioner Wisnauskas.
Thank you.
Next, I have Mary Tingerthal, who led the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency from 2011 to 2019. She now provides consulting services to public and private organizations, working to increase the availability and sustainability of housing that is affordable to low and moderate income families. Welcome, Commissioner Tingerthal.
Thank you, Jill. Glad to be here.
Thank you. And last but not least, we have Director Natasha Detweiler-Davy, who serves as Director of Affordable Rental Housing at Oregon Housing and Community Services, also known as OHCS, where she has transformed the state's approach to affordable housing finance through 18 years of progressive leadership. Her work focuses on integrating research-based practices, building strategic partnerships, and advancing equity and affordable housing development. Natasha led the creation of the Oregon Centralized Application, also known as ORCA. We'll talk about that a little bit more later, fundamentally changing how Oregon allocates housing development resources. She has developed innovative financing mechanisms, including programs that leverage general obligation bonds to fill critical funding gaps for development projects, which serve to position Oregon as the top multifamily bond issuer among Western states. Welcome, Natasha. All right, so now that we have completed introductions, I have a few questions for you all. Ruth Ann, in 2010, the New York State Division of Housing and Community Renewal and NYS Homes merged into a single agency in order to reorganize its housing functions under one entity. The other goals included increasing efficiencies and the goal of consolidating leadership of the state's housing agencies. Commissioner Wisnauskas, could you please describe this reorganization and how it helped to streamline the delivery of affordable housing finance resources and reduce administrative redundancies in New York?
Absolutely. Thanks. And thanks for having me here today. I'm delighted to be with you all. I'm a beneficiary of a process that I inherited and didn't have to go through what I'm sure were a lot of growing pains along the way, but I came to the agency in 2015.
Commissioner, could you speak into your mic a little bit more? You got a little quiet there.
Sure. I don't know how to speak into my mic, but how about that? Is that better? I don't know where my mic is. No, I'm still quiet. Oh.
No, now you're at the right volume.
Oh, okay.
That's so funny. Okay, great.
Okay, so I have been at this 2025 now. I have been at the agency for about 10 years. So I came in about 5 years after the integration process happened. So I was sort of a beneficiary of what, had been quite a process and a lot of, growing pains, as would be with any sort of change in an agency. And so I'm sort of fortunate to sort of certainly catch it kind of at the tail end of still finishing pieces of the integration. I think some people at this agency would say some parts of the integration maybe never fully completed from where it began. But what I would say was, the idea around it was making sure that we really preserved the strengths of the agencies as they got merged. We wanted to be, at the time, more efficient and do the work with less resources. And we started with a sort of platform of consultation. And so because it was such a big opportunity to merge the two agencies, we talked to the private sector, we talked to academia, we talked to partners in government, we held roundtables all across the state. We are about an almost 20 million population state. We have 10 regions of the state. It's a pretty big geography, and the housing challenges and the sort of governmental infrastructure is very different in New York City than it is in the North Country or in the Binghamton and different parts of the state. So it was a lot of consultation around the state in terms of what people saw as benefits and what people needed. And we wanted to make sure that we talked to the housing and community development world and to advocates and to practitioners to figure out how we could do this best. We also spent a lot of time with our employees. We had dozens of suggestions from employees at staff meetings. We did employee suggestion boxes. So there was really, I'm saying all this we, even though I wasn't here, but we in the spiritual sense. So we wanted to make sure that employees of the entities really felt like and we wanted genuinely to have sort of that voice. We wanted to be, in the long term, to be flexible and consistent and transparent and make sure, at the end of the day, we're very focused on having measurable results that make our work better for the people of New York. So I would say that it has been great. I mean, sort of having inherited it as it was, it is really incredible to have a purview of work in the state that cuts across, and just sort of to give a little bit of a sort of kind of like a wingspan, right? We are the recipient from the feds of home and CDBG Section 8 weatherization dollars. So we have kind of this real federal throughput. We administer the 9% and the 4% tax credit programs, as well as using the Texas and bond program, not only with the fours, but also to do single family first-time homebuyer mortgages. And so the ability to sort of see across the state and we also run sort of a series of a sort of home improvement kind of programs, as many agencies do. So the ability to have sort of the breadth to see across all those programs what we're doing where, because obviously not every community wants a 9% or a 4% tax credit deal, but they do want other housing investments. And so the ability to sort of scale and toggle by having an integrated agency at the program level is really incredible. And then also it translates down obviously to the I would say sort of at the administrative level, right? Our architecture staff, our engineering staff, our design guidelines, our sustainability guidelines. Those things were not really fully integrated, I would say, when I got here. And we've done a lot of work to make sure we are holding, sustainability guidelines across the work we do across all our program areas. I think it's even true for things like our intergov work and our communications work, right? Having one centralized team that can see the work that we're doing helps in how we talk about our work and who we talk about it to, and the ways we get the word out. So I think it's been, it was certainly a process that took a little under a year because the mandate was to do it quickly.
Wow.
But I think we have found that our work is more meaningful. We take less time to do it. It costs us less. We bring complementary programs together to maximize their effectiveness, and it's been certainly as states and places are looking at sort of the integration. The last thing I would sort of say, which is a wonky comment that I say sometimes when I talk. So I'm the like commissioner and the CEO and the president, which is like what, because even though my sort of entity is called New York State Homes and Community Renewal, that's not actually an entity. Underneath that are all the legal entities that we oversee, which is our, multifamily HFA, our state line agency. We have another sort of subsidiary entity that's the federal pass-through. So, there are always still going to be sort of lumps and bumps, which we'll talk about a little later, about sort of what it actually means to integrate sort of legally and as opposed to sort of operationally. And I'll leave it at that.
Wow, very, very fascinating. I have several follow-up questions that I'll bring up towards the end, but thank you for that. I'm going to switch over to Minnesota so we can understand the approach Minnesota has taken to date. In California, one of the most pervasive challenges for affordable housing developers is the process of applying for affordable housing resources. This process often entails cobbling together multiple sources of financing from different entities, which can introduce project delays and carrying costs. Makes sense. Minnesota Housing offers a multifamily consolidated RFP, which is a competitive funding round offered once per year and provides a means of one-stop shopping. Commissioner Tingerthal, could you describe how multifamily consolidated RFP works in Minnesota and how it has helped to streamline the process of applying for funding among affordable housing developers?
Thank you, Jill, and thanks for the title of commissioner. I served as commissioner only till 2019, and I do have to say my successor, Jennifer Ho, is still very much engaged and has helped to bring over $1 billion into housing in 2023. So, and she now serves as the head of the National Council of State Housing Agencies. But I think that's an interesting lead in to the fact that the consolidated multifamily RFP process has been in place in Minnesota literally for decades. The Housing Finance Agency was established in the 70s, like many other housing finance agencies, and for a while was not a cabinet level agency. But in the 80s, it became a cabinet level agency, and at that time began to get much larger state appropriations. There has always been one state agency that
Okay.
fulfills both the appropriated dollar roles and the tax credit and tax exempt bond issuance roles within the state of Minnesota. I know there are a lot of states that have had two agencies for a long time. Minnesota has really had one at the state
Okay.
level. Um, so the consolidated RFP came into place. I will note that there is also a consolidated RFP for single family resources. I'm not going to
Mhm.
talk about that today. Um, but it has evolved over time. And during the time that I was at Minnesota Housing, there'd been a practice of generally using the guidelines set up in the state's qualified allocation plan that it must adopt for low-income housing tax credits, for those guidelines to be used for the selection and the awarding of other resources.
Okay.
But we made that more explicit during the time that I served as commissioner. So the QAP scoring, which is very public, goes through a very public adoption process, is used to not only award 9% credits, um, a portion of the private activity bonds that are awarded in the state, but also significant state appropriations, as well as the Federal Home Program, the National Housing Trust Fund Program, and the HOPWA program. That said, the Housing Finance Agency does not administer the Community Development Block Grant Program, the Weatherization Program, or housing vouchers. There is not a statewide housing voucher administrator in Minnesota. As I thought about this, I think the goals of having a consolidated RFP, three jumped out to me. One is to simplify the application process. There is a one-stop shop for a big chunk of resources. I won't say all of the resources, but for a big chunk of resources that are allocated by the state. And that does mean a simpler process. It is an online process that developers of any size and shape can use. It has gotten fairly complicated, I will say that. But there are both navigation aids from the Housing Finance Agency as well as from a number of processing agents around the state. The fact that it's been in place for decades means that people just expect it. They know that this is the way it works. They know when to watch for changes in the scoring. And so it's at the fabric of how things
Mhm.
get done in Minnesota.
Mhm.
I would say a second goal is that it supports self-scoring by developers. And over the time that I was there, we introduced a couple of tools, including something called community profiles, which is a geospatial system that
Mhm.
allows a developer that may be thinking about doing a project to literally go into a map-based application that allows them to see how many of the points in the QAP that would be geographically scored actually happen for that particular site that they're looking at. And I've had developers tell me that they'll go in and look at literally 10 different sites for the geographic scoring criteria before they decide which one that they're going to buy. Um, the self-scoring also, I think, as the criteria change from year to year, helps developers to know whether the consolidated RFP is the best route for them, or if they should maybe pursue other resources that might be available locally, doing a private activity bond allocation that doesn't require other resources, and really, I think, allows people to self-select the lane that they think will be most applicable for their particular project. And a third goal, I would say, that was very important to us as we went through the selection process every year. The goal was always that the projects that got selected for tax credits and for the other resources walked away from the selection process with essentially all of their resources in place.
Mhm.
They might have brought a few to the table when they applied, but they walk away with a package, depending on the project, of tax credits, tax exempt bonds, and soft resources to do the entire capital stack. And I think that's a really big deal. There are a couple of other notes. I know we're running short on time, but the timing of the RFP is well known and well communicated. There's an intent to apply process that happens in May of each year. The applications are due in July of each year. And that intent to apply is a little bit of a screening so that the staff at the agency can let developers know if it looks like there might be something they might want to think harder about. There
Okay.
is also an early no process. So it's about a 5-month process between when applications are due and when the funds are awarded. But there's an interim spot about halfway in that period where those projects that are simply not going to be competitive are notified that they're not going to make it that year. And developers find that very, very helpful. Because it's within the QAP that the priorities are established, they are clear and they are public and they go through a public process. Now, that doesn't mean they're always well liked by developers, but at least everybody knows the rules at the same time. And
Sure.
policy can be shifted
Mhm.
by how points are awarded. And a good example of that in Minnesota is a priority for permanent supportive housing. Things will continue to evolve, and it's far from perfect, but that's the system we've been living with in Minnesota over the years. Thank you.
Is Minnesota on an annual QAP development process?
It's a 2-year
2
QAP.
year. Okay. Okay. So that's even more fascinating because it sounds like this process now provides the opportunity for more than sufficient planning for developers and applicants.
That's the goal.
Yes. Okay. Very good. Very good. Well, thank you for that information. All right, Natasha, you're up. In 2024, Oregon launched Oregon Centralized Application, also known as ORCA, which provides a unified application for loans, grants, and tax credit funds to develop affordable housing in Oregon. Could you describe what problem ORCA was trying to solve, how it's been working so far, and any challenges you run into?
Certainly. Thank you so much. And can you hear me okay?
Yes,
Great.
thank you.
Okay. Oregon's Housing Finance Agency is within the state's executive branch and Oregon Housing and Community Services. And we are the state agency responsible for overseeing housing and homelessness programs across the state. And so the work that I focus on is our kind of traditional housing finance agency functions. So we are responsible for investing state and federal funds for supporting housing development. So that includes loans, grants, tax credits from an array of sources, including federal programs and also those invested through our state legislature, including resources that the state generates through general obligation bond issuances. And so we are the primary funder of affordable rental housing from the state. And as you mentioned, we launched that. And so I think, in a lot of ways, like if we're thinking around one-stop shop, we have been the place where all of the different state resources exist and are accessed through, with certain exceptions, of course, in the health systems and other places which already also have some pieces of housing ties. Although we also do have our permanent supportive housing effort internally here at OHCS. And so so I think what we were seeing is as the complexity and the kind of diversity of resources that we had available to be able to invest in projects, we really started to see that we were issuing multiple competitive project kind of in policy aligned focuses of NOFAs, so notices of funding availability. And at a time when our state's housing needs analysis was, updated, recasted, and demonstrated a shortfall of over 100,000 affordable housing units across the state, felt like spending all of our time, effort, and energy, or the most of our time, effort, and energy on the competitions for the projects and the consideration of those and moving all of those forward, felt like we were spending more time on the competition and more focus on the competition than the actual stewarding of resources into community and investing those projects to be successful in development. Certainly it added time cost and complexity in terms of the number of times a project would need to apply and compete for resources, the number of times we were evaluating those same projects for those different resources. And so the idea of wanting to make sure that we can improve the ways that we focus our effort, focus our energy again on bringing those projects, supporting the projects. And overwhelmingly, the developers that work in the state, I'm sure like most of everybody's communities, are developing and designing amazing projects that are all really deliberately designed to serve and meet the state's needs and policy objectives. And so in that environment where there's a critical need, we had resources available and wanted to make sure that we could support as many projects as could move forward. I think another piece of that complexity was really where we were having projects compete. It was not having their focus on readiness. And so where we would be giving a reservation of resources out of a competitive process, there was still a really extensive delay for a lot of projects between that moment of time and when they were really truly ready to begin construction. And there were, lots of work to try to get that to be tightened up, but really still felt like that was an inherent challenge to the way that our resources were were being offered in that competitive place. So in that vein, we reimagined the way that we would be designing our application processes, replacing the competitive NOFA with a rolling standards-based application system. And so not first come, first served, but first submitted, first evaluated. And so I think it migrated our competitive scoring structure into a standard to say, what is it across all of our projects we need to have exist? And then there is, if you're a PSH, permanent supportive housing, and our PSH efforts are focused around serving chronic homeless populations. And so then that has, more information in it, but really as a singular point of entry to be able to be evaluated to whether you meet the standards. And I think corresponding to updating our systems to the centralized application, which we named the ORCA, we also created and had state investment in pre-development funds to support project readiness as they are doing those application processes and moving projects forward. It creates an intake system where we are able to see the full array of projects that developers have on desks. So not ones they're ready to make applications for, but where we can see all of, they give us the basics of all of their projects so that we understand the landscape, we understand where we see projects, where we don't see projects, where we're wanting to ensure that there's development in communities across the state, including very rural communities. And so knowing that becomes then a place where we can get more insight to be able to understand where we need to focus other investments in capacity or otherwise. And I think the first year of the ORCA, we launched in spring of last year. And so in the first year, I think we're at the year anniversary here. We have now a $3 billion pipeline. That's not all our money. That's the the total project cost or project in the pipeline, representing 15,000 affordable homes. It has significantly increased production, rural investment, and also I think really laid out a more transparent process. And it is not perfect. I think as we do this work, I'm emphatic around our need to be committed to evaluating and refining where we're seeing unintended impacts. And I think for anyone who runs probably anything, including certainly funding processes, there's always unintended impacts. And I think those being able to make sure that we are remaining nimble enough to be adjusting as we go. And so we're doing some of those refinements as we go, I think getting our system stronger, but have seen a lot of success in the work and the projects that we have done. I think emerging challenges that we see, certainly increased reliance on subsidy as part of the development budget. I think you also have to see that within the actual market and the market volatility and construction costs and lending costs and decreasing tax credit pricing, among many other things. So we don't exist in a vacuum, but I think that is an emerging trend where we had previously been able to ensure that we had points to drive down the reliance on subsidy. We now have an overall subsidy cap that doesn't do that quite as much, again, wanting to support the development, but finding, again, with the challenges in getting sufficient debt to cover as much of the development costs as it had been previously. I think another thing that we hear and talk about a lot, again, we're oriented to moving projects forward. We have effectively max times that you can be in any one stage of development. However, there's still a really compelling voice from development community around if my project is ready to build tomorrow and the other one's ready to build next week, we should fund the one that's ready to build tomorrow first. And I think that is, an ongoing challenge. And I think that's, again, there's not an endless supply of resources to be able to plug them in on a weekly basis. So I think that those are really what we're, still seeing and wanting to understand how we need to continue to navigate forward. But I think that's my overview. Thank you.
And how long did you say this process took?
We really kicked off in I think it was January of 2023. Our Governor Kotek issued an executive order around production. So really that was our catalyst for beginning the work. I think had done some background work and other before then, but so really, a little less than a year of active engagement and work to pivot our systems and structure and organization.
Did you all build this application yourself, or did you issue an RFP or outsource it?
We did it internally.
Okay. I just suspect somebody might reach out to you asking more about that.
It was a lot of work.
I can imagine. Before I jump into some of the Q&A or the questions that I'm receiving in the chat, for all of your approaches, did any of you all, or do any of your approaches allow or consider the needs of local governments, counties, cities to participate or to be a part of these initiatives?
I can go first. I think, in Oregon there are, so I think consider it yes. In the ways in which we do have some other state funding programs that are directed to be able to give local communities access to state lending to be able to invest directly into projects. And so I think that's largely the place, but I think in looking at how we set aside resources and do intentional relationship building and collaboration across the cities, I think knowing that local needs need to drive the housing response is instilled within our structures.
So in your example, well, this is kind of different. I was having a hard time phrasing the question in a way that would apply to all three of you all. If a city has some funds and wanted to be a part of your ORCA, could they come to you and ask to be added to that whole application process? Or similarly,
I would welcome them. Nobody has asked if they would want to give us allow us to steward, be the conduit for their resources, but it would work to do so.
Okay.
In Minnesota, over the
Mhm.
years, there have been, it's sort of ebbed and flowed as to whether local entities decided to use the same process to literally award funds that they had at their disposal. And there are two examples I think are best. The St. Paul Public Housing Authority was a very early allocator of project-based vouchers,
Mhm.
and they chose to essentially use the scoring criteria of the consolidated RFP to figure out which of the projects would be awarded their vouchers, and then they went through a separate approval process that they were
Okay.
required to do for HUD.
Okay.
The other resource, we have a metropolitan form of government in the Minneapolis-St. Paul metropolitan area, and they have several sources of resources that they can allocate. At one time, they were more directly involved in the allocation process. I think that's waned a little bit over the years, depending on who the administrator is and whether they see value in doing that or not. But the door is open
Mhm.
for
Mhm.
local entities that would like to take advantage of the single application process.
Okay. Very, very interesting.
I would say sort of slight variation on that kind of question and answer for us. We, every affordable housing deal already has 7 sources in it. One of the like home run pieces of the integration, right, is we can, and I think you guys both touched on this, right, but we can plug and play resources across
Like
the different
right
programs, which
size.
is really helpful. But the other thing
Mhm.
we did recently, our energy agency, who is great, and other states have one as well, was doing like electrification dollars. And so people were going there to get electrification dollars for our projects. And we were kind of like, why don't you just give us those electrification dollars and let us lend them in at the same time we're doing everything else? There's not another entity lending into a project that already has, 1 or 2 state entities lending into it. And the same for our economic development agency. Like if they are giving a grant for a ground floor use of some sort, we have done these sort of lateral within the state agreements to say, like,
Okay.
let us transfer the funds to us and then let us lend them in, so that people don't have to go not only to like a municipal government and a state government, but then multiple state governments for the same deal.
Sure.
So I think all of that kind of consolidation, to your sort of opening salvo here, like it saves time, and time is money, and we don't have time for things to get stalled out because the crisis is too great right now.
That's fascinating. I'll tell you, ladies, that in the chat, we have a lot of, we have some other state agencies in the audience. And one of the questions that's come up are unintended consequences, best practices that you would recommend to any other agencies looking to consider something like this in their respective states.
I would say the thing, it is not, it's great on an outcome base. I would say as the sort of, as like as executive of it, it's certainly for us, because we are multiple things, it's lumpy, and it's always going to be lumpy because I have like state civil service staff, and then I have authority staff, and I have, sort of, so people are in different buckets and they're on different payrolls, and they're, it is messy as an administrator. It's all for the great cause and we muddle through it. But I think it's always going to be, the goal is the right goal, but you can't really expect it to. Other states maybe would do it better, but it's lumpy in the administration on the inside.
Okay, that's fair. When you're
I
with your
would
consolidation, did you have to let anybody go or downsize?
I don't know how they did this exactly, but when I was prepping, there was about 15% of the overall staff. I think they might have either done an early retirement kind of
Okay.
package deal, because we were merging, certainly, especially in the back office sense, a lot of back office functions. So there was a downsizing and a desire to be more efficient in that
Sure.
way. I'm
Sure.
not sure how they paid for it, but
Yeah, I got you. Okay. I apologize, Mary. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, I would say one of the trends that I see more in recent years is that as there are more and more applications for a set number of dollars, you have more and more people who don't make it through the RFP process.
Mhm.
And I've seen a little bit of a tendency for there to be a proliferation of locally awarded resources so that if they don't meet the criteria that happen to be the criteria at the time, that they will find another path to cobble together the funds. And so, you know, is that good or is that bad? It is what it is. But I think that that's what's causing me pause these days about it's really hard to meet all the priorities, whether it's rural versus urban, whether it's permanent supportive housing versus workforce housing. It's gotten harder and harder with the scarcity of funds to make sure that there are some that you address all of those important priorities to at least some degree.
Yeah, and I think I'll just I agree, I think on all of those pieces. I think it is, consolidation does not mean that there are sufficient resources for all projects. And so I think as you are taking on an effort, ensuring, and I think, as we sit inside state government, that means we are, we are directly interacting and responsive to legislative and other executive branch outreach on very regular basis around projects that they have heard about or aren't moving forward, or we're trying to apply a standard of and to make those really tough choices. And so I think the places where we don't have the individual NOFA debrief and deep dive on that kind of recurring basis, we do still have the challenge of insufficient resources to meet all of the demand from very incredible projects that are all really designed in relationship with community and are important and they all matter. And I think just challenging to really understand that. And I think the place where we decide to need to do one of everything or some of everything
Sure.
gets less specific about our what our real objective is.
We probably have time for one or two more questions, but there's a theme of one question that I keep seeing over and over. How have you guys had to encounter conflicting requirements, program requirements, or even QAP requirements, developer experience, et cetera? How have you reconciled that in your consolidations?
Yeah, I can just quickly say, I think for us, as we were doing our ORCA development where we could align, we aligned, and then we just have, again, where we can route and do the attribution to the appropriate
Yes,
resource.
makes sense. Makes sense.
I would say that, within the consolidated application process, one of the things that I think works really well is the use of what I would call a best fit approach. So that when you're getting everything at once, you can match that project that meets the requirement of the home program. And you don't have to have the developer decide, oh, okay, I've got to apply for home because I've got a really low income project. And so having a single application and letting the agency staff do that best fit analysis is a really useful part of the process.
Wow, fascinating. Yeah.
Jump in really quick. I know we're at time. I would just say the great thing about it is you can sort of direct, because you can have one sort of incoming, right? It is expensive to do 9% applications and it's really expensive to do 4% deals. So being able to say, oh, if you're a smaller emerging developer, a BIPOC developer, we have a different program lane where you could start with a small rental development or that's not a tax credit. You don't need to get an investor and a syndicator and build up your portfolio a different way. So I think it actually, the consolidation provides a bigger menu for different types of developments and different types of developers.
Very good.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much. Unfortunately, it is time for us to wrap up. I just want to thank all of you. Thanks to Jill for your excellent moderation. Thanks to our panelists for sharing your expertise. This is a wonderful event, and you can obviously watch the video version of it if you want to watch it again. And please consider following us on social media. We put a whole bunch of links in the chat. Thank you all so much for attending.